The letter from the Homeowners Association had 3 exclamation points. You save 3 exclamation points for "the house is on fire" or "the bar is giving away free wings." Or maybe, "a pack of rabid wolves has been spotted stealing garden gnomes." You do not, as a rule, use them for drip irrigation. But there it was, in crisp 12-point Times New Roman, accusing my tomato plants of excessive and repetitive noise pollution. My tomatoes, which last I checked were non-verbal. The letter slipped into my mailbox like a secret government summons, informed me I was in violation of Bylaw 7G, community nuisances, and was being fined $50. I was to cease and desist the auditory nuisance immediately. My name is Mark. I'm an engineer, and I work from home. I like quiet. I like systems that work. I live in a neighborhood of beige houses, taupe fences, and a color the HOA swatch book calls grieving fawn. It's a place where the loudest sound is usually someone's aggressively oversized SUV backing out of a driveway. My one tiny rebellion, my single spark of joy, was my front yard vegetable garden. It was a masterpiece of efficiency, and the drip irrigation system was its heart. It was silent, water-saving, and automated. It delivered precisely 0.8 gallons per hour directly to the roots. The only sound it made was a gentle, satisfied pft, 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 and you had to be standing in the garden to even hear it. The letter was signed by the board, but I knew, with the certainty of a man who knows the sun rises in the east, that it was ghost-written by Karen. Karen lived directly across the street. Her lawn was a chemically maintained carpet of unnervingly perfect green. Her hobby was watching the neighborhood through her blinds, which would twitch with the intensity of a sniper's crosshairs. She was the one who reported Jim down the street for his unapproved basketball hoop. She was the one who measured the height of my grass with a ruler when I was 2 days late mowing. I flashed back to last week. I'd been on my hands and knees weeding my bell peppers when the screech came from across the street. "Mark! Mark!" I looked up, shielding my eyes. "Hey, Karen, everything okay?" She was on her porch, hands on her hips, clad in a pink velour tracksuit. "Your system is running again." "My irrigation?" I said, standing up and dusting off my knees. "Yeah, it's Tuesday, 10 a.m. It's on a schedule. Good for the water bill, you know." "It's the sound," she said, her voice tight with repressed fury. It's a hissing, a dripping. It's incessant. I can't hear my daytime television." I was standing 3 feet from the main valve and could barely hear it over a light breeze. The only hissing in this neighborhood was coming directly from her. "Karen," I said, trying to be reasonable. It's water, in a tiny plastic tube. It's not exactly a rock concert." "It's pollution, Mark. Noise pollution. And it's affecting my migraines. You'll be hearing from the board." And well, here we were. I was officially a noise polluter. I stood there on my lawn, letter in hand, and fumed. It wasn't the $50. I'd pay the $50. It was the principle. It was the sheer weaponized stupidity of it. My silent, eco-friendly, virtually invisible system was a nuisance. But her husband's gas-powered leaf blower at 7 o'clock a.m. every single Saturday, a machine that sounded like a 747 was trying to land on her roof, was just property maintenance. I looked at my thirsty tomatoes. They looked back, blissfully unaware of their criminal status. "Fine," I muttered to the empty street. "You want a nuisance? You want noise?" I went to my garage, grabbed a pair of shears, and walked back to the garden. Snip, snip, rip. I tore it all out. Every last tube, every emitter, every single fitting, until all that was left was a pile of black plastic spaghetti on my driveway. I paid the fine online, and for one full day, there was silence. My garden was a dust bowl. Karen sat on her porch that evening, sipping a massive glass of white wine, smug. She had won. She thought this was over. She had no idea what she'd just started. She complained about a drip. I was about to give her a flood. That night I didn't sleep. I made a pot of coffee so strong it could have probably dissolved steel, and I pulled out the Welcome to the Neighborhood binder. It was 3 inches thick, bound in faux leather, and weighed about 9 pounds. It was the sacred text of our little suburban slice of hell, and I was going to read it, cover to cover. You want to beat the system? You have to know the system. I read about approved mailbox colors, beige, taupe, or the aforementioned grieving fawn. I read about fence heights, no more than 48 inches in the front, 72 in the back, and never chain link. I read about satellite dish placement, must not be visible from the street, trash can etiquette, must be retrieved within 4 hours of pickup, and the maximum allowable gnome-to-lawn ratio, 1,500 square feet, and they had to be classic gnomes, no novelty gnomes. My eyes were burning. It was 2:00 a.m. I was on my 3rd cup of coffee, and my brain was numb from the sheer volume of petty tyranny. I was about to give up and just pave the whole yard when I found it. Section 9F. Landscaping and Water Features. My heart skipped a beat. I read the first clause. Point 1. Ponds, defined as any non-aerated stagnant body of water exceeding 12 inches in depth, are strictly prohibited due to potential mosquito risk and liability. My shoulders slumped. A pond would have been easy. I kept reading. 9F2. Swimming pools, in-ground or above ground, are permitted, but must be located in the backyard and fenced in accordance with City Code 114.A, useless. My garden was in the front yard. But then, right below that, tucked away like a forgotten treasure, was Clause 9F3. 9F3. Contiguous water features, such as ornamental, streams or brooks, are permitted in front or backyards provided they meet the following criteria. A. Do not exceed 10 feet in width at any point. B. Are professionally installed with a concrete or rubber-lined base. And C. Incorporate a circulating water system to prevent stagnation. I read it again, and a third time. A contiguous water feature, 10 feet wide, with a circulating system. They banned ponds. They regulated pools. They said nothing about a moat. My engineer brain, which had been dormant and fuming, suddenly kicked into high gear. The logic gates flew open. A moat. A beautiful 9-foot-wide, concrete-lined, circulating moat. It would run from my left property line, curve around the front of my lawn, and stop at the driveway on both sides. It would be exactly where my tomato garden used to be. It would be deep. It would be wide. And the pump? The circulating system? I'd make sure it was a commercial-grade 2-horsepower beast that would create a lovely, rushing, audible white noise. But a thought struck me. How would I get to my house? How would I get my car in the garage? The moat would cut off my driveway. I frantically flipped to the Structures section, Section 12C, Permanent Structures, Sheds, Gazebos, Pergolas, and other permanent non-dwelling structures require a 3-month architectural review and approval process. A bridge, a simple, permanent bridge, would be a permanent structure. They could tie me up in committee for months, years even. They'd deny it, citing aesthetic harmony or some other nonsense. But what if the bridge moved? I scanned the bylaws again. There was no definition for a bridge. There was nothing about access ramps or movable platforms. If it wasn't attached permanently at both ends, if it could be raised and lowered, it wasn't a permanent structure. It was vehicular access equipment. A grin spread across my face that was probably 90% caffeine and 10% insanity. I wasn't just building a moat. I was building a goddamn drawbridge. The next morning, I made 2 calls. My first was to Gus's Landscaping and Excavation. His truck, caked in at least 3 different colors of mud, pulled up an hour later. Gus himself was a big guy, built like a refrigerator, with a cheerful, sun-scorched face. He lumbered onto my porch, clipboard in hand. "All right, Mark," he said, giving me a firm handshake. "Dispatch said you wanted to talk water features. You thinking a nice koi pond over by the bushes? A 3-tier fountain? We do great work with bubblers. Very soothing." I didn't say anything. I just unrolled the blueprints I'd spent all night drafting on my CAD software. I spread them out on the hood of his truck. Gus stared at the plans. He squinted. He leaned in, tracing the lines with a thick finger. This is a moat." "I'm calling it an ornamental stream," I said, trying to sound as professional as possible. "It's 9 feet wide, 4 feet deep, concrete lined." "It needs to run from that property line," I pointed, "around the front and stop right here, at both sides of the driveway." Gus looked up from the plans, then at my house, then across the street at Karen's house, where the blinds were definitely twitching. He looked back at me, a long, slow smile spread across his face. "This is because of Karen, isn't it? She complained about my drip irrigation." Gus let out a sharp bark of a laugh. "Drip irrigation? That woman made me rip out a client's pink flamingos last month. Said they were emotionally aggressive. A moat, a moat. I love it. My guys can start Monday." "One more thing, Gus," I said. "The bylaw says it needs a circulating system. I need a pump, a big one. I want to hear the circulation, if you know what I mean. From across the street." Gus's grin widened. "Oh, I've got a 2-horsepower submersible trash pump that's just sitting in the shop. It's not quiet. It's going to be loud. The digging, the concrete. It's all going to be loud." "Gus," I said, shaking his hand again. "I'm counting on it." My second call was to a custom metal fabricator I found online. Sal's Steel and Engineering. The guy who answered sounded bored and perpetually annoyed. "Sal's Steel. What do you need?" "Hi," I said, trying to sound casual. "I need a quote for a 12-foot drawbridge. Wood planks, steel frame. Needs to be fully functional and able to hold the weight of a 2023 Honda Accord." There was a long, heavy silence on the other end of the line. "A what?" "A drawbridge, for my ornamental stream." "Is this a prank?" Sal asked, his voice suspicious. "Did my ex-wife put you up to this? 'Cause it sounds like something she'd do." "No, I'm completely serious," I said. "I've got the dimensions. I need it operated by 2 electric winches, fully counterweighted so the motors don't burn out. And I need a very large, very obvious control panel on my porch, with a big button." "You're building a moat," It's a contiguous water feature, I corrected him. Sal burst out laughing. It was a hacking, rusty sound, like he hadn't laughed in years. This is the most beautiful thing I've ever heard. You got the permits for this? The city's gonna have your head. That's the best part, I said, feeling a surge of pride. I already got the city excavation permit online. It's a landscaping water feature. And the bridge, it's not a permanent structure. It's a movable access ramp. I checked. A movable access ramp, Sal repeated, savoring the words. I love this. I'm in. I'll be there in an hour. We're gonna need to talk about lighting. You gotta have uplighting on a beast like this. And maybe a horn. You gotta have a horn. You know, for safety. When the ramp is in motion. Sal, I said, you're a genius. Monday morning, 7:01 a.m. The world exploded in a symphony of diesel-powered rage. Gus, true to his word, had arrived with a mini excavator. The Soisu machine roared to life, and its beep, beep, beep as it reversed off the trailer was loud enough to wake the dead. Or, in this case, the Karen. I was on my porch, sipping my coffee, wearing a brand-new hard hat and a pair of safety goggles, just to be official. Right on cue, Karen's front door flew open. She stormed out in a floral bathrobe and fuzzy pink slippers, clutching her phone like a weapon. "Mark!" she shrieked, marching to the edge of her perfect lawn. "What is this? It's 7 in the morning!" I took a slow sip of coffee. "Morning, Karen. Just some landscaping. Got a permit and everything. The crew's very professional." Gus, in the cab of the excavator, gave her a cheerful wave. "Mornin', ma'am. We'll be here all week. Gotta dig this ornamental stream." He punctuated the sentence by plunging the excavator's bucket into my front yard, ripping out a massive chunk of sod and beige-approved flowers. The thud of the dirt hitting the truck bed shook the ground. A stream," she stammered, her eyes wide with horror. That's a trench!" "Gotta start somewhere, Karen," I yelled back over the diesel roar. "Progress, you hate noise. You should probably keep the windows closed. Gus, you're doing great." "You'll be hearing from the board," she screamed, already filming with her phone, which was shaking with her rage. "They already know," I shouted. "I emailed them the plans and a copy of Bylaw 9F3. It's all above board." The sound of the excavator digging up my lawn was a symphony. The beep, beep, beep was the percussion. The diesel engine was the bass. The scrape and thud of the bucket was the melody. Karen was filming, muttering and gesticulating wildly. The hole got deeper. The pile of dirt on my driveway got higher. By noon, my front yard looked like the Battle of the Somme. A few days later, the digging was done and the rebar was in. The concrete trucks arrived. Not one truck. 3 of them. One after another, a parade of massive, rotating, diesel-spewing behemoths that proceeded to line up and completely block the entire cul-de-sac. You want to know what's louder than a drip, drip, drip? It's a 10-ton concrete mixer idling outside your window at 8 a.m., while 3 guys in muddy boots yell at each other over the noise of the chute. The entire neighborhood was out. My lawn was a web of steel. Karen was in a state of pure panic. I watched, delighted, as she ran from truck to truck, telling the drivers they couldn't park there, that they were blocking the road. The drivers, all burly union guys, just pointed at me. I was on my porch, hard hat on, and gave them a cheerful thumbs up. They were just doing their job, after all. Naturally, she called the police. A single, tired-looking patrol car pulled up about 30 minutes later, parking as close as it could to the convoy of mixers. The officer, a guy who looked like he hadn't smiled since 2005, got out of his car and sighed. He saw Karen waving at him like a drowning person, and he saw me, sitting calmly on my porch. He walked over to me first. "Morning, sir," he said, adjusting his belt. "We got a call about, this." He gestured to the industrial hellscape my yard had become. "Morning, officer," I said, chipper. "Just a landscaping project. Got the permits right here." I handed him the city excavation permit and the concrete pouring permit. He looked them over. "Right. Ornamental water feature. Looks like you're all paid up." He turned to Karen, who had marched across the street. "Ma'am, he's got his permits, and the trucks are allowed to be here for a pour. It's a public street." He's... Look at it," Karen sputtered, pointing a shaking finger. "It's a bunker. He's building a bunker." "Ma'am, it's a hole with rebar," the cop said, his patience visibly fraying. "It's not illegal." "It's a nuisance!" she shrieked. The cop's eyes met mine for a split second. I saw a flicker of something. Amusement? Pity? He turned back to her. "That's a civil matter, ma'am. You'll have to take it up with your homeowners association." He then keyed his radio. "Dispatch, it's a civil matter. HOA dispute. Clear me." He tipped his hat to me. "Good luck, man. That's a big pond." "It's an ornamental stream, officer," I said with a straight face. He smirked. "Right. Have a good one." He got in his car and drove off, navigating around the concrete trucks. Karen was left standing in the middle of the street, her mouth opening and closing like a fish. The concrete began to pour. A week later, the concrete was cured. My front yard was a 9-foot-wide, 4-foot-deep, U-shaped concrete canyon. Gus and his team had installed the pump, the 2-horsepower trash pump he'd promised, and filled the entire thing with water. The hum was glorious. It was a steady, powerful whum that was, in my opinion, 1,000 times more soothing than Karen's leaf blower. But the project wasn't complete. On Friday morning, Sal's flatbed truck arrived. On it was the most beautiful, over-engineered thing I had ever seen. It was a 12-foot-long, 10-foot-wide drawbridge built from a skeleton of black-painted I-beams and topped with thick, stained oak planks. Sal and his team, all wearing Sal's Steel t-shirts, were like proud artists. "She's a beaut, ain't she?" Sal said, slapping the steel frame as they winched it off the truck. They spent the next 4 hours bolting the massive steel hinge frame into the concrete of my driveway. They installed the 2 electric winches on posts disguised as decorative pillars on my island, the new name for my front yard and house combo. They ran the steel cables, tested the counterweights, and hooked up the wiring. The grand finale was the control panel. Sal installed it right next to my front door. It was a bright yellow, industrial-grade metal box. Inside it was one giant, red, satisfying, mushroom-shaped button that said bridge, and another, slightly smaller, yellow button that said horn. "Okay," Sal said, wiping grease from his hands. "She's wired. The winches are tested. Counterweights are balanced. You wanna do the honors?" "Sal," I said, my voice thick with emotion. "I thought you'd never ask." I stepped up to the panel. I pressed the bridge button. A loud mechanical whirr filled the air as the electric motors engaged. It was the sound of pure victory. Slowly, majestically, the 12-foot drawbridge lowered over the 9-foot moat, coming to rest with a perfect, solid thud that echoed across the cul-de-sac. It's beautiful," I whispered. "Now try the horn," Sal said, grinning. I looked at the yellow button. I pressed it. A deafening blat, like a tugboat in heat, echoed across the neighborhood. Dogs in 3 different yards started barking. A car alarm down the street went off. It was glorious. And of course, it summoned Karen. The blat had barely faded when her door burst open. She sprinted out, phone in hand, and stopped dead at the edge of her lawn. She stared at the moat. She stared at the drawbridge. Her brain, I assume, was trying to process what she was seeing. A drawbridge, she finally shrieked, her voice cracking. Are you insane? I was standing on my porch, next to Sal, feeling like the king of a very small, very suburban castle. It's a movable access ramp, Karen, I yelled across the water. Fully compliant with Section 12C, non-permanent structures. It's not a violation. This is a violation, she screamed, her face turning an impressive shade of crimson. This is a fortress. You can't do this. This is un-American. Sure I can, I shouted back, gesturing to the humming, circulating water. And look, it's not a pond. It's a contiguous ornamental stream, no stagnation, no mosquitoes, just a lovely circulating water feature. Very soothing, don't you think? I'm calling the city, she shrieked. I'm calling the HOA board. I'm calling my cousin who's a lawyer. You're going to jail, Mark. You do that, Karen. Have a great day. Thanks, Sal. Anytime, Mark, Sal yelled, giving her a wave. I turned back to the control panel. If you'll excuse me, Karen, I'm securing my property. I pressed the bridge button again. The whirr started up, and the drawbridge slowly began to rise. Karen was still screaming at me, but her words were cut off by the rising wall of wood and steel. I gave her a polite little wave as the bridge locked into its vertical position, sealing me inside my island. My kingdom was safe. It didn't take long for the official response. The next evening, I was cooking dinner when I heard shouting from the sidewalk. I looked out the window and saw the entire HOA board assembled at the edge of my moat. It was Karen, of course, looking like she was about to have an aneurysm. Beside her was Bill, the HOA president, a flustered-looking man in a golf shirt who always seemed surprised by everything. And next to him was Brenda, the treasurer, who was clutching the HOA binder to her chest like it was a shield. The drawbridge was up. I was on my island. Mark! Bill yelled, his voice cracking. Mark, lower the thing! We need to talk! This is an official HOA meeting! I slid open my living room window and leaned out. Sorry, Bill, can't, I yelled back. My insurance guy said it's a liability to operate it with people standing so close, but we can talk from here. What's up? You know what's up, you maniac, Karen shrieked, pointing. This thing. Mark, Bill tried, pulling his golf shirt down. This is not what the bylaws meant by water feature. This is extreme. Bill, I've got a copy right here, I shouted, holding up my own laminated copy of the bylaws, which I now kept by the door. It says contiguous water feature. This is contiguous. It says circulating system. That's what that loud, soothing hum is. It says not to exceed 10 feet. Gus measured it at 9 feet wide, all the way around. I am more compliant than anyone in this neighborhood. Did you know Jim's satellite dish is visible from the street? That's a 14B violation, Bill. Bill flinched. Brenda, the treasurer, stepped forward. But, it's a hazard. A kid could fall in. It's 4 feet deep, Brenda, I called back. Just like the community pool you guys refused to heat. And it's on my property. Are you suggesting I fence in my yard now? Because I can. I was looking at some very nice wrought iron spikes to put on top of a new perimeter wall. I think it would be very old world." Bill and Brenda both paled at the thought of a spiked wall. No, that's not," Bill stammered. "Mark, just be reasonable." "I was reasonable," I shouted, my voice finally rising. "I was reasonable when I had a water-saving, silent, invisible irrigation system that kept my tomatoes alive. This is what happens when you're unreasonable. This is what happens when you fine a man for drips. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have to go to the grocery store. I'm out of milk." The board looked confused. "But you're trapped," Karen said with a smug look. I smiled. I held up a small remote I'd programmed to my garage door opener. I hit the horn button. Blat! The entire board jumped back a foot. Then I hit the bridge button. The whirr kicked in, and the drawbridge slowly, majestically lowered itself to the driveway. "Gotta go," I said. I got in my Honda Accord, started it up, and drove over my drawbridge. I hit the remote again, and the bridge rose behind me, once again sealing my property. I gave the stunned, speechless board a friendly wave as I drove past them and headed to the store. I thought that would be the end of it. I was wrong. I got home from the store, my trunk full of milk and frozen pizzas, to find 2 police cars parked at the end of my driveway. Karen, it seemed, had escalated. She had called 911, claiming I had barricaded myself in my house and was making terroristic threats. My drawbridge was still up. 2 officers, one young, one the same tired veteran from the concrete incident, were on the sidewalk. Karen was there, of course, talking to them with a look of practiced, tearful concern. I heard the veteran cop on his radio as I walked up. "Dispatch, I'm at the moat house." "Yeah, you heard me. It's a house with a moat. Just show us as on scene." I parked my car and walked over, carrying my grocery bags. "Evening, officers. Problem?" The veteran cop looked at me, then at the moat, then at my bags. He looked exhausted. "Sir, are you Mark? That's me." "Sir," the younger cop said, stepping forward, "we got a 911 call that you've built a fortress and are refusing access to your property and making threats against the community." "He's a menace," Karen piped up from a safe distance. "He threatened us with spikes, and that horn, it's deafening." I sighed. "Whoa, no, I did not threaten anyone. I was having a landscaping discussion with the HOA board about a potential new fence, and I mentioned wrought iron spikes. It's a very classic look. As for access, I pulled out my remote. "Blate!" The cops both flinched. The bridge lowered with its familiar whirr and thud. "See?" I said, gesturing. "Full access. You're welcome to come check for, I don't know, trebuchets, hostages. I've just got some melting ice cream in these bags." The veteran cop looked at Karen. His expression was not friendly. "Ma'am," he said, his voice flat. "This is a 911 emergency line. This," he pointed at my house, "is an unusual, but not illegal, HOA dispute. You're wasting city resources. He hasn't broken any laws." But, look at it," Karen sputtered. "It's his property, ma'am. As long as he's not breaking code, he can build, well, this. Do not call 911 again unless there is an actual, real emergency. Do you understand me?" Karen's face crumpled. She had finally overplayed her hand. She just nodded, mute, and scurried back to her house. The veteran cop turned back to me. He looked at the moat, the bridge, and the horn. A tiny smile played on his lips. "Honestly, man, I'm kind of impressed. This is wild. But please, Tell me you don't actually have a trebuchet." "Not yet, officer," I said. "Just working with the bylaws." "Right." He shook his head, looking at his partner. "Let's go. This is why I hate working residential." They got in their cars and left. I picked up my groceries, crossed my drawbridge onto my island, and raised it behind me. The next day was Saturday. The weather was perfect. I decided to inaugurate the moat. I called Gus and Sal, the two men who had made this dream a reality, and invited them over for a BBQ. "You gotta get some stuff for the water, Mark," Gus had said on the phone. An hour later, I'd returned from the pool store. By 2 p.m., Gus, Sal, and I were sitting on giant inflatable swans floating gently in the 9-foot-wide, crystal-clear, ornamental stream. The 2-horsepower pump provided a pleasant gurgling sound as it circulated the, now chlorinated, water. We had a cooler of beer floating in a tube of its own. "You know, Mark," Gus said, leaning back on his swan and cracking a beer, "I've been in landscaping for 20 years. I've built waterfalls, retaining walls, fancy patios. This is my masterpiece." "The horn was a good touch," Sal added, sipping his own beer. "It's got authority. I'm thinking of offering it as an add-on for custom gates." "I couldn't have done it without you guys," I said, raising my can. "To malicious compliance." "To malicious compliance," they echoed. The rest of the neighborhood was treating it like a new tourist attraction. People were walking by, taking pictures. Kids were riding their bikes past, stopping to stare. Most of them were laughing and giving me a thumbs up. Jim, the basketball hoop guy, walked by and just yelled, "You're a legend, Mark!" I was a local folk hero. Karen's blinds were closed so violently they were crooked. The best moment came around 3 p.m. The mail truck pulled up. Dan, our mailman for the last decade, got out with his usual stack of letters and a small package. He's a man of routine. Drip irrigation, he understood. This was not in the manual. He got out, walked up to the edge of the moat, and just stopped. He looked at the mailbox, which I had dutifully relocated to the sidewalk side of the moat, per HOA regulations. He looked at the package in his hand. He looked at me, floating on a giant swan, drinking a beer 20 feet away. "Mark!" he yelled, his voice full of disbelief. "You got a package!" "Oh, hey, Dan," I called back, paddling my swan to the concrete edge. "Just a sec, be right with you." I climbed out, toweled off my feet, and walked to the control panel. "Clear the ramp," I yelled, mostly to myself. I hit the horn button. Blat! Dan, who was not expecting it, dropped the package. "Sorry, Dan," I yelled as I hit the bridge button. The whir started, and the drawbridge slowly lowered, thudding into place at his feet. Dan just stared, dumbfounded, as I walked across to him. He picked up the package. "Mark," he said, handing it to me. "What? Why?" I leaned in, as if sharing a secret. "HOA, Dan. They didn't like my garden hose." Dan looked at the moat. He looked at the bridge. He looked at Karen's house, and a deep, profound understanding dawned on his face. He shook his head, a slow smile spreading. "You're a legend, Mark. A damn legend. But just so we're clear, all your mail is going in that box from now on. I'm not waiting for that every day." "Totally fair, Dan," I said, taking my package. "Totally fair." I walked back to my castle, and the drawbridge rose behind me. The HOA, predictably, held an emergency vote. A new bylaw was drafted, FedExed to every homeowner, and passed within a week. Bylaw 9F.4 was born. It was an emergency addendum that specifically banned all moats, drawbridges, ramparts, portcullises, and non-navigational waterways intended for defensive purposes. They had passed the Mark Rule. It was beautiful, but it was too late. I had built it while it was still legal. My ornamental stream and its movable access ramp were grandfathered in. I sent them a polite, registered letter thanking them for their diligence and assuring them I would abide by all bylaws that currently applied to my property. My house was now officially known as the Fortress on Google Maps. Life with a moat is different. Deliveries are a hassle. I had to install a large delivery drop box on the sidewalk next to my mailbox. The Amazon guy loves me. The Girl Scouts, on the other hand, are very confused. And yes, my property taxes went up slightly, as the city assessor had no category for residential moat and had to classify it as a custom water feature, which apparently adds value. But it's worth it. Every penny. I was sitting on my porch a few months later, watching the sunset. The moat was placid. The pump was humming. I was watering my new potted tomato plants, which sat safely on my porch, with a simple, quiet, non-mechanical watering can. That's when I saw it. The final, glorious nail in the coffin. A for sale sign was being hammered into Karen's perfect chemical green lawn. I heard from Jim later that the last straw wasn't the moat itself. It was the 8:00 a.m. daily drawbridge test horn that I'd started performing every morning. Apparently, it was disrupting her sleep. I took a sip of my coffee and looked out over my own private waterway. My kingdom was finally quiet. Well, mostly. I walked over to the control panel, a small smile on my face. My finger hovered over the yellow button. Just to make sure it's working, I muttered to myself. I pressed it. Blat! A light flicked on in Karen's house. I smiled. Yeah, it was working just fine.